Hey everybody, we're the Mentorers. I'm Jamie. I'm here with my co-host Gabe. Gabe, how you doing, buddy?
Hello. I'm doing great. It's a beautiful Wednesday. I'm upright and warm. How bad could I be?
Yeah, we got to golf last weekend. It was finally nice enough.
Yeah, it was terrific. Jamie played quite well,
I played quite poorly, but nice of you to
availing
say.
himself well of the sport.
Yes, that's like local Jewish sports news. It's just like what
Yeah,
sports?
we played golf.
What sports have you and I been
our
playing?
Jewish sports news is we played golf.
You tried to go to Panzer's Deli afterwards, and it was closed.
Yeah, it was
maybe
closed,
maybe
so-
it was too proximate to Passover. I don't know.
I think it's just closed on Sundays, which is odd because that is not our traditional day of rest
Sure.
as a people. But no, we're doing good. We're in I guess week 3 of the hockey playoffs. The second round has started.
Yeah.
The PWHL playoffs start today.
Oh, that's exciting.
I think as this time, our beloved PWHL Toronto is doing quite well. They won 4-0, so that's pretty huge.
Right.
Although not so much Jewish, but our friend Kaylee Fratkin and PWHL Boston has their first game in tomorrow night, so they're the first happening going on. But we'll get to talking about hockey otherwise.
Let's talk a little bit about our guest that's coming up later on the show. We have Alana
please.
Schreiber coming on.
First time caller, long time listener.
Yeah,
Alana
she truly
Schreiber.
is a fan of the podcast. She shouted us out. I remember last year on the MLB podcast. She's done some MLB podcast production and works for NPR down in New Orleans. How do you say New Orleans? Do you say New Orleans?
Nolans.
Nolans.
You got to go full stank.
Yeah, you lean
Nolans.
into the bon temps.
You gotta laisser la bon temps brûlée, especially with the way you say New Orleans, especially the way you say Nolans, as if you got gumbo in your mouth.
I've only been there once for like 4 days, but I have watched all 4 seasons of Treme, so I feel like that's like a badge of honor enough to like,
By the end of the trip, are you like talking like Antoine Baptiste, like gotta have my bone?
Yeah, that's right. Just talking about trumpet playing and.
Dr. John, I don't need to hear Big Chief again.
All right, let's not digress too much into.
Let's not get too Cajun.
Into Crescent City banter. But Alana came on to talk about an upcoming podcast radio production that she has been working on in conjunction with Major League Baseball about Rickwood Field, which is in Birmingham and is the oldest professional baseball park still in operation.
I'd like to recognize Alana before we get to the interview. I'd like to be the first to formally recognize her as bringing together, the two, I would say, largest Northeast Jewish fandoms, which is Major League Baseball and NPR.
Right. That's right. I would say that
together under one umbrella of Alana Schreiber.
That's a good point. That is, I would say, like 75% of the content I consume in the world is either NPR podcasts or Major League Baseball games.
Exactly.
And other content. Anyway, so
if your entire life could be that Planet Money episode about vending, about hot dog vending,
right?
That's what it would be. That's her.
That's true. That's the one circle, the overlapping circle Venn diagram of my interest.
Of your interest, exactly.
Please stick around and listen to the interview with Alana. It was really interesting. She was a great guest. Before we get to that, let's do a little roundup of post Passover Jewish sports news. As you said, we're into week 3 of infinity of the NHL playoffs.
They call it the hardest trophy in sports to win. But I think that's just because it is who is literally alive at the end of the playoffs.
Right.
The NHL playoffs are 2.5 months long, sometimes 3 months. Like, it is a slog.
Yeah, and the remaining teams are pretty Jewish, I would say, like on the grand scheme of things. I know your beloved Toronto Maple Leafs lost, but they lost to Jeremy Swayman, now confirmed Jewish.
By an all-time performance by a Jewish goalie.
Yeah, not having a great game.
Can't really be
tonight.
mad about that.
I think they pulled him just now. They're going to lose Game 2 to Florida, but obviously the Bruins, have vanquished some ghosts of their own, I guess, and are working on making it into the third round or further. Otherwise, in the eastern half of things, the New York Rangers, who have Adam Fox and Artemi Panarin, are up 2-0 and will likely be moving on to the conference finals.
Yeah, they haven't lost a game yet this playoffs. They're 6-0.
Yeah.
Carolina was sort of a favorite to win the whole thing. And New York is kind of, I don't want to say dominating them, but they are just better over the first 2 games.
Right.
And, Fox and the Breadman are a big part of that. But tonight, in about an hour from when we're recording this, and when you're listening to this, it'll happen. We get the Battle of the Jewish Titans.
Yeah, that's
Zach
right.
Hyman's Edmonton Oilers going right up against Quinn Hughes' Vancouver Canucks.
How's that for some Canadian Jewish news, huh?
There you go.
There will definitely be some Jewish representation there in the Western Conference Finals.
That's just the headline: Canadian Jewish news. Hyman meets Hughes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty exciting, and I think I don't know. Is there anyone? What was the name of the guy on Colorado who used to play for Washington? Who people reported was Jewish but isn't.
People thought was Jewish.
Yeah. Andre Burakovsky.
Andre Burakovsky. There you go.
Okay. So Andre Burakovsky no longer with the Colorado Avalanche. I don't think anyone on the Stars is Jewish either.
The maybe Jewish.
Maybe Jewish.
Andre Burakovsky.
But regardless, definitely we'll have some Jewish representation in the conference finals. And maybe even the Stanley Cup. Zach Hyman is killing it. He has 7 goals. I would say he's only not leading postseason in goals right now because Edmonton only played 5 games. Part of those stats just have to come down to how many games you play. But he may well be leading again. He had a hat trick on Passover or right before Passover. That was pretty amazing.
We'll see what happens tonight. Vancouver is if not the one of the best defensive teams in hockey. And Quinn Hughes, their number 1 defenseman, obviously Jewish, and Zach and Connor McDavid make up the best offensive line in hockey. So it's an unstoppable force against an immovable object with only one Jewish person can come out on top.
In case anyone was confused, while we all know that Jesus was Jewish, Mick Jesus is not Jewish. So.
Although we did recently see him give a clip we shared on our socials.
That's right.
Of him awarding Zach Hyman with a celebratory babka and challah on his 50th goal.
That was amazing. For people who didn't see that, check out our Twitter account. There's a video of him wheeling in a service tray with a babka and a challah with the numbers 50 in it.
I think it was a clip from the Edmonton Oilers, behind the scenes YouTube show.
Yes.
With them calling immediately after Hyman was called the greatest free agent signing in franchise history, which he might be. Yeah. Not a lot of free agents score 50 goals. I'll tell you that.
That's definitely true.
And getting his 50 goal challah.
Moving over to basketball, I mean, there's not much to talk about unless you want to have a deep discussion about who all the Jewish Knicks fans are.
So there was one Jewish Knicks fan I wanted to talk about.
Okay, sure.
It's interesting you bring this up. I'm glad you bring this up. Recently I've discovered, have you ever seen Ben Stiller's Twitter?
Yeah. It's like almost a bit, but it's real, where it's just
if you didn't know what he was talking about, it would be unintelligible.
So just to clue in our listeners who are thankfully less online than we are, beloved actor and director Ben Stiller is a Knicks fanatic and is
beloved notable Jew Ben Stiller.
Yeah, notable Jew. Meet the Parents. You guys know who Ben Stiller is. All he does is tweet about the Knicks, and like it's his job. Genuinely, has leaned into it like it's his job.
Yeah,
now.
He tweets at Fred Katz, former guest of the Benchwarmers. He'll be like, "Hey, at Fred Katz, why did Precious Achiuwa get 15 minutes tonight?"
Absolutely, and honestly, it is an amount of tweeting and obsession that is again, it's just this is his full-time work, but it's just it's the kind of in-game tweets that it's unless you are also watching the Knick game and on Twitter
and
at the same time, you will not understand his tweets of just good quarter, something derogatory about Joel Embiid, things like that, where anyways, it is great. It is real. Do you remember Norm Macdonald had a bit where he would just tweet about golf until people unfollowed him? It seems like that, but he's really leaned into it. I saw he went on, I didn't see which, but he went on Nick's podcast to talk about his fandom, and he's been at all the games. I mean, I think prominently with Jon Stewart. So,
there's a great photo that came out of Stiller sitting courtside with Tracy Morgan, both giving the finger to Tyrese Maxey.
That's great, and we should say as well, just 2 other things about basketball was that maybe converted. We'll try to get an off-season update. Maybe converted Jew Domantas Sabonis got a 4th place vote for the MVP. He came in, I think, 6th, 7th, 8th, and Jalen Brunson, New York Knick, who's still alive in the playoffs, came in 5th. And I know what you're thinking. Wait, Jalen Brunson, is he Jewish? Unfortunately, he's not, but he is married to a Jewish woman. So shout out to him. I'm sure there's celebration in the Brunson household. Now that they're
Passover.
They're eating bread, and Jalen came in 5th. I don't think the All NBA votes are out yet, and I'm not sure if he's going to make the first team just because of the way the guards and forwards work out there. But
shake out with all the superstars. It's a tough one.
But
it's
still,
a tough team to be on.
That's a hell of a come up for a guy who, I think has been acknowledged for a while as like, very solid role player, good guy to have on your team. But like, okay, if you're going to build your whole team around him, like what's your ceiling? Again, like he's been in the league for 5-6 years, like has had solid years, and the last 2 years in New York have been good. But this is like, okay, you are a star. We can build a team around you. And he
just keeps getting better, and the Knicks keep getting better around him. We're losing the plot a bit here on Jewish athletes, but I know that Michael personally is a big fan. Our producer Michael is a big fan of former Raptor OG Anunoby, who's been playing excellently for the Knicks throughout this whole season. Missed a chunk of games, but is back in time for the playoffs.
Yep. So if you got to cheer for someone, cheer for the Knicks, I guess.
Mike is pointing that he is watching OG Anunoby right now.
Because by the time this airs, we'll know how Game 2 went. And if they
we could just check Ben Stiller's Twitter to see what he's.
Yeah, that's right. Check Ben Stiller's Twitter if you want to know the outcome in the Knicks Pacers game.
It's the weirdest thing.
Just before we move on to the interview, I just want to give a shout out to Kevin Pillar. He was recently cut by the White Sox and picked up by the Angels. And he hit 2 home runs last night. So pretty good. It is shocking. It is May 8th, and Kevin Pillar is the Jewish home run leader in baseball right now. Jock Peterson and Zach Geloff also have 3. But Kevin Pillar, maybe coming back, like many a Jew of a previous generation, just moving out to LA and having a good resurgence. This is like his. This is maybe this is the spot for him.
Home runs aside, and I think the Zach Geloff is proving himself to be a real like future team.
Oh yeah,
a real future star. But we're also seeing we're also seeing what I think is pretty exciting. Harrison Bader performing really well for the surprisingly successul New York Mets.
Yeah. Having a pretty decent year, hitting 270, stolen a few bases. Not a lot of power to speak of.
I think but he's hitting leadoff, is my understanding. And the team's 500. They're hanging in there. Nobody expected them to be any good, but they're doing all right, and he's sort of a big part of that.
Yeah, and on the bump, Max Fried and Dean Kramer have both been solidifying themselves as really front end starters. Max had a bad first game, but has been really, really solid since then. And Dean Kramer is ERA is under 4. He's throwing a lot of innings.
He's throwing great. A lot of strikeouts too.
Definitely.
Averaging more than 5 Ks a start, which is really terrific.
And one more pitcher we should talk about, Matt Mervis of the Chicago Cubs was enlisted to pitch. I believe his
career pitching debut.
Yeah, I can't remember. So he is not a pitcher.
He's first baseman.
He's a first baseman.
He's a big boy. He's in the Rowdy Tellez physical mold.
Yeah, exactly. And he only got 1 out. Unfortunately, during that time, he gave up a number of runs. This is like they had to send to NASA to calculate his ERA.
Calculate Norm's bar tab.
You know how like sometimes in the early season, like you can figure out ERA like off the top of your head. Anyways, he gave
infinite. It's just inf.
Yeah, he gave up six earned runs in a third of an inning.
Nice.
His ERA is 81, which is not great. It's not what you want, but
it is backwards of 18. Which
2/3 of an inning. Sorry, 2/3 of an inning. But yes, it's backwards of 18. Anyways, just a fun little tidbit to mention that he got his MLB pitching debut. Before we move on to Alana, I just want to. We talk a lot about Negro League baseball. Do you know about the Getty Lee collection at the Negro League Museum?
No. I assume you're talking about the bass player, keyboardist, and lead singer of the Toronto band Rush.
Of course.
And not some Negro League player I've never heard of.
That's right. It would be interesting if there was also a Negro League player named Getty Lee. But Getty is, of course, an avid baseball fan, often at Toronto Blue Jays games. And he donated 200 autographed baseballs to the Negro League's Baseball Museum.
That he's been collecting.
That he has collected, yeah. And
Mhm.
it's one of the largest donations, for that museum. There's a whole collection of them. It's been there for a while, and I would say I haven't been to the NLBM in Kansas City, but everything I've read about it makes it sound amazing and
Yeah,
definitely worth your
the
time.
museum seems spectacular.
Yeah, if you're nearby, it is supposed to be pretty not it's supposed to be the second best baseball museum in the world, and I think that given how amazing the Hall of Fame is, that is extremely high praise.
Although
I think education about the Negro Leagues is something that Major League Baseball is very interested in these days, or has been more interested in the last 10 years than it was in the previous 100 odd years.
120, yeah.
But it's interesting that they're doing the game in Birmingham, which we talked about, and it's interesting to see the Jewish angle on that as well. I think there's a lot of overlap there, or there was there were a lot of connections between Jews and the Negro Leagues that are interesting to think about, and interesting to think about what the legacy of that is.
I think if you were to ask, friend of the pod, Josh Rawich, which baseball museum was better, he'd call it, there are no ties in baseball. I'm going to predict what he'd say. He'd say, there are no ties in baseball, but I'm going to call this one a tie.
Okay. That's well put. Anyways, very interesting interview with Alana. Let's go to that now.
Is life really miserable for the Jews, or are we just glued to a 24-hour news cycle?
Should we be worried that so many young rabbis are coming out of seminary as anti-Zionists?
And what does Judaism say about polyamory?
If you want answers to these questions, well, we don't have any. But we do love asking them. Each week, tune into Bonjour Chai to hear debates and hot takes by me, Avi Feingold,
and me, Phoebe Maltz-Bovey,
as we sit down with pundits, rabbis, and scholars to talk about the most pressing issues facing Jews in Canada and around the world.
Listen and subscribe to Bonjour Chai at thecjn.ca/bonjour or wherever you get your podcasts.
Very happy to be joined tonight by Alana Schreiber. Alana works for NPR. Hi, Alana.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to finally be talking to you guys after years of listening.
Always nice to be joined by a fan. Pumps up our egos a little bit.
Literally a first-time caller, long-time listener.
Oh, yeah. And I will say in college, I taught a Hebrew school class about Jewish athletes for kids in Minnesota. So I feel like I've written the curriculum.
Wow. How many lessons was that? Because we're on we're on a couple hundred podcasts, and we're still looking.
I mean, we never got into Scrabble championships in this Hebrew school class.
That was a great interview. Anyways, not to let's not make this podcast about this podcast. But Alana, sorry. You are here to talk to us about a podcast that you're working on and a story that you're working on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for the past few months, I've been working on this podcast called Road to Rickwood. It's a partnership actually between NPR and Major League Baseball, and it's been really exciting. So the premise is that this June, Major League Baseball is going to be hosting a regular season game at Rickwood Field in Birmingham, Alabama, between the Giants and the Cardinals. A lot of people don't know, but Rickwood Field is the oldest professional baseball stadium in the country. It's 114 years old, and it's in Birmingham, Alabama. And it had segregated baseball, integrated baseball. It also was once the venue of a Klan rally. It was once the venue of a women's suffrage event. This one stadium has lived so many lives, and it's 100 years. So it's really just a look at the intersection of baseball and civil rights in Birmingham, and telling that story along with some of the people who lived it, like some former Negro leaguers who are in their 90s, some players on the very first integrated baseball team, some names that might be familiar to you, very first integrated team in Alabama. So yeah, it's been a really amazing experience. Mm-hmm.
If memory serves, there was a rather famous NBA player who played for the Birmingham Barons for a period of time. Isn't that right?
Well, I'm going to put it the other way. There was a lot of famous Birmingham Barons who played a little bit on the Harlem Globetrotters, which we can get into.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting. I was referring, of course, to Michael Jordan. That's where he played his.
Oh, yeah. But of course, but he actually never played at Rickwood Field. He did play in Birmingham, but by then they moved to Hoover. Yeah.
I see. So this is when you say it's the oldest field. I guess that means that it's the oldest field that's still in operation. I mean, there's other stadiums that have come and gone, but this has been in continuous operation in some capacity.
Yeah, it's the oldest professional baseball field in America. So it was the second oldest until Comiskey. And then once they tore down Comiskey, everyone in Birmingham was like, oh my God, guys, like Alabama's first in something. Let's go.
How long, like has Rickwood Field, it's now hosting, I guess it's the first Major League Baseball game in a very long time they've had for there. But what has the stadium been used for the last 115 years?
It's been used for everything. And I'm actually really glad you brought this up because there's a fun Jewish story connected to this. So, but Rickwood Field did start out as a segregated ball field, and they would have a team, the Barons, play there, and then exhibition games. So you'd have, Babe Ruth has played there, Lou Gehrig's played there. And I should say, because of these exhibition games, literally 30% of all Hall of Famers have played or managed at Rickwood Field, which is crazy. 30% have at some point been involved there. So
that's crazy.
Yeah. So it was, in so many ways, it was upholding segregation for a long time, but they would still allow Black fans to come and watch the white team play. They just had to sit in a section called the Negro bleachers. But when the, Black community started to field their team called the Black Barons, which became one of the most successful Negro League teams of all time, Black fans would take over the stadium and the white fans had to sit in the Negro bleachers, which very interesting.
Interesting.
But it also was used for football games for a long time. Bama and Auburn would play games there. And actually, Mel Allen, who a lot of people know as a famous Yankees announcer, grew up as Mel Israel, originally from the small town of Johns, Alabama, just outside of Birmingham. His parents had fled from Tsarist Russia. And he was this huge baseball fan as a kid. And while he's in law school at Bama, he actually gets a job calling football games. And the way it would work was games would be played at Rickwood, and someone from Western Union would be there tapping in Morse code on the telegraph. He'd receive the Morse code over at Bama and, hear dot, 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 oh, and touchdown, and would be able to relay that to people. I mean, it's crazy. And that really is what set him up to then later have this big career in baseball. He worked for the New York Yankees for years. He started the going, gone. And it's funny because he has Jewish parents, the whole time his dad was like, I wanted him to be a lawyer. And his mom was like, I wanted him to be a cantor. But he did become very successful. And
you know what? Announcing Yankee games is somewhat in between cantor and lawyer, I think.
I would agree.
It's a particular type of cantor. It's not, your traditional cantor. But it's a type of cantor. It is
a type of cantor. And he, he just has this amazing career. And I will say, there's a photo I have to send you guys. He would go back to Rickwood all the time. They had Mel Allen Day. They eventually gave him a key to the city of Birmingham. Maybe is the first and only Jew to have a key to the city. I have no idea. I made that up. Don't quote me. But
well, it's funny.
At least one given willingly.
Yeah. It's funny because there's actually more Jews, famous Jews from Alabama, are involved in Alabama sports than we think about. We had Leor Berman, who plays or just finished up playing for Auburn. Bruce Pearl is obviously the Auburn coach, not from New Jersey. Mel and Allen, you mentioned it, and Paul Feinbaum, who's I don't know. I don't think people not in the South or not interested in college football could understand how important he is to SEC football and Alabama football, but he is the foremost. He is to football radio what Howard Stern is to regular radio. Can't overstate his importance and influence as a media personality.
Definitely. I think that Mel Allen maybe was the first iteration, or within this first wave of Jews being hey, we love sports. We're not great at them, but we can announce them. And so he probably inspired a lot of Jews who wanted to find some way to be involved in sports, but knew that they weren't going to necessarily be the one to take the field.
So speaking of this game's coming up. I want to, I'll ask this question starting now and then going backwards. Are there any Jews involved in, or can you tell us any Jewish people who are involved in the 2024 game? Short of, I guess, Ken Rosenthal, who will presumably be there. But, in the 2024 game and or in the past, are there more famous Jews that have played at the stadium or will be playing now?
Oh, that is really interesting. I don't know about necessarily. I would say there's probably a very good chance that some famous Jews of the past would have played an exhibition game here. Something I would love to find out is one of my favorite intersections of Jews in the Negro Leagues is the House of David team, which you may have heard of, was this team from Michigan that was started out as like a kind of Orthodox Jewish team, but later kind of anyone could join so long as you wore a fake white beard to look like David from the Bible. One of my favorite stories was actually that it was the first, the Denver Post tournament in Denver was the first professional integrated baseball tournament ever. But it was in Denver. But in order to make it more interesting, not only did the House of David play the Kansas City Monarchs, they recruited Satchel Paige to play with them. So Satchel Paige, very early on, before Jackie Robinson integrates the Dodgers, Satchel Paige is playing on a Jewish white team in Colorado. But I will say, as far as, Jews involved in baseball today, I'm just going to shout out one of my favorite Jews involved in the game, who's Sarah Langs, who is my kind of introduction into MLB. She, I started out with MLB just kind of like freelance podcast producing for her podcast, and everything she's, done since coming out with her announcement about having ALS and for ALS awareness has done so much amazing stuff. She's still figuring out if she's coming to the game. So if she comes, that's amazing.
Yeah. Didn't know she was Jewish. I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Me either.
But in terms of favorite Jews in like the MLB world today, it definitely has to go to Sarah. She's one of my favorite people. And in so many ways, like, I guess Bob, might have been without her.
Bob Melvin will be there. You said the Giants that are playing, so Bob Melvin will be the coach, manager of the Giants. So that's to say, you mentioned something about Abe Saperstein, who is, or Saperstein. I don't know if we ever. Anyways, he was famously
litigated that particular pronunciation.
Famously, the owner of the Harlem Globetrotters. Sort of halfway between P.T. Barnum and Steinbrenner, something like that.
Yeah.
What was his involvement or his relationship to Rickwood Field?
Absolutely. So Saperstein's like a very complicated character. Born in London, raised in Chicago in this kind of like predominantly German and Irish neighborhood, was kind of the only Jewish family in the area. He played baseball, basketball, and track, and then when he was working on the south side of Chicago is when he claimed he like first saw Black athletes playing basketball and was like, why are more people not interested in this sport? So he starts the Harlem Globetrotters. They have nothing to do with Harlem, but he thought giving him that name would make people know that they were Black, and Globetrotters, who implied they traveled the world. And for, a long time they're traveling around, and they have to stay at like in horrible accommodations, right? Like they're staying, so twice the team has to stay in jails. When they're in Nebraska. There's nowhere else in town that's going to let Black players stay. But eventually Saperstein, it became really important to him to make sure that Black athletes did have better accommodations. He would also drive them around in his own cars. And, again, I think primarily he was always kind of focused on making the most money for himself. I think no one can really argue that, but he did really push the limit. And it was important to him that, even though he was making the most money, that these athletes were able to make an income. So what he would do for a lot of athletes who played baseball is he would give them off-season jobs with the Harlem Globetrotters. So he becomes involved in the Birmingham Black Barons, I think around like 37 around then. And by then, Satchel Paige, did his stint with the Barons. And he actually, in 1933, had Paige pitch for a white team for a one game in Bismarck, North Dakota. So he already knows Paige and is already, doing things with him. It's important to say, too, that like the kind of basketball and baseball he was promoting was very gimmicky. And it had Black players often, playing in grass skirts or doing these kinds of stunts. And I think it was dehumanizing in a lot of ways. But he is trying very hard to just make sure that these players have money. And he's also getting them way more exposure, especially when integration sort of becomes this topic of mind. He's booking them at Yankee Stadium. He's booking them at Comiskey. He's booking them at places that no one else is going to get them. And also, by the time Satchel Paige is signing with Bill Veeck for Cleveland, he makes sure that Satchel Paige gets a decent signing bonus. Jackie Robinson's signing bonus for the Dodgers was $3,500. He makes sure that Satchel Paige gets $10,000. Of course, he gives himself $15,000. So, he's definitely
he's making out okay.
He's making out okay. So, he's no hero. I don't think you can say he's like good or bad, because he's, always primarily looking out for himself and kind of enforcing some harmful stereotypes. But he also did a lot to get these athletes certain exposure and definitely pushed the limits of what was acceptable at the time, and went a lot further than others.
I'm sure we'll hear more about it during your show, but it is interesting to sort of remember that the Negro Leagues for most of their existence, in various forms, like they really did have to do everything they could to get people in the seats just to sort of survive as teams. I think that there's that the Bingo Long Traveling All-Stars movie that's about Negro League barnstorming players that sort of showcases the degree to which they're, sort of showmen and having to do sort of gimmicky things, which I think my take on it, at least, it's just sort of undergirds the reality of how unjust it was to have segregation in baseball, because it's like, you have obviously Negro League players who are better than their white contemporaries throughout the existence of baseball. And it's like they weren't allowed to play on the even playing field, sure, but they were also, having to do the sort of gimmicky things that got people in seats. And it's sort of like, well, again, I understand why that was necessary. I'm sure there were lots of ways that was, there was good and bad with that, I'm sure. But fundamentally, what it meant was it wasn't Josh Gibson playing baseball at the highest level consistently, or Satchel Paige playing baseball at the highest level consistently that they should have been.
I think it would go even further, not to interrupt, but back to Abe Saperstein. One of his, we'll call it less savory things he would do is he put together a bunch of basketball teams of all different races,
right? And
have them. There was, a Chinese team and a Jewish team and a black team, and have them compete against each other for everyone's amusement in a relatively quiet race war.
Yeah,
and
not ideal.
It would be
got people
not
in the
ideal.
seats.
Again, he's primarily trying to make money, and I think that one of the things about the Negro Leagues is you have some teams kind of leaning into those gimmicks more than others, right? Like the Indianapolis Clowns were one, the Zulus. And then other teams like the Black Barons that largely really weren't about that and were playing games. But also with the team like the Black Barons, I think often you kind of see the gimmicks more when it comes to the traveling barnstorming teams trying to drum up interest in an area where they're not at. But in Birmingham, the Black Barons were huge. You didn't need more than that. And there were some players who, would make things interesting. Like Piper Davis would often, they'd say he'd play 9 positions in 9 innings, and in the 10th inning, it's time to sell beer. But he, but he was good at that. And, they, and I think also the style of the Negro Leagues, the style of play was a lot faster, more bunting. Rickwood Field also has the largest outfield in baseball. It's 480 feet. It was ridiculous. And so because of that, a lot of people weren't even going for home runs. It was, you got to make the small ball happen. So,
sure.
So with a team like the Barons, I think you definitely see a lot more of, the fans they overtook the field on game day, and the white fans were the ones crowded in the tiny Negro bleachers.
Alana, I want to ask, you mentioned earlier before the show, you were from New Jersey. How did, a young producer from New Jersey wind up living in the South and working on local Southern baseball stories?
Yeah.
Well, meaningful Southern baseball stories.
So I'm going to trace that back to 4th grade. I had to do a history project, and I have a twin sister, and she asked my dad, who was the second Black person in the Major League Baseball? And my dad tells her about Larry Doby, who coincidentally retired in Montclair. And I'm just thinking oh my God, there was a before and after Jackie Robinson. I never really thought of that. And now I'm thinking my sister's going to have a way better project than me. What am I going to do? And then my mom was reading Buck O'Neill's obituary, and she told me all about this guy, Buck O'Neill, who played in the Negro Leagues for years for the Kansas City Monarchs. He was the first Black manager in the MLB, and he just barely didn't make it into the Hall of Fame and died shortly thereafter. But apparently the kind of story with him was it didn't really matter to him that he didn't personally make it into the Hall of Fame, because he was so grateful that the league was being recognized, that the Negro Leagues, other players were getting, and this league that meant so much, it was finally kind of, getting its flowers. And that really struck me, that your league could somehow be more important than your own career. So I do my project on Buck O'Neill. I do my project, on Buck O'Neill in 4th grade. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. But then I'm just so fascinated by the Negro Leagues. And then I worked for NPR in Colorado. I learned about the Denver Post tournament. I go to Kansas City, go to the Negro League Baseball Museum, meet Bob Kendrick. And I'd always wanted to move to New Orleans. And I finally was able to get the NPR job to make it happen. It's just the weirdest, craziest place. Colorado's beautiful, but hiking's a hobby, not a personality. And I needed to be around weirdos. And so
New Orleans, however, is a personality, not a hobby.
It really is. It is absolutely a personality. And so living there, I mean, baseball's touched every part of this country. The Negro Leagues has touched every part of this country. And so these stories really aren't hard to find. And it's been really meaningful to be able to live in my new home in the South and, you know, find a way to connect with baseball, which is this thing I grew up with, being raised a Mets fan in New Jersey. So it's been really special.
My condolences for that.
Thank you.
No, my dad is from Queens, and he is a lifelong Mets fan.
As is my dad.
Maybe if we live long enough, we'll see professional or Major League Baseball in New Orleans. Crazier things have happened.
The Zephyrs can.
I know.
So to answer I've actually told this story on the podcast before. My dad found out recently. You know, he's 70 years old now, and he found out within the last year that the Gary Cohen who calls Mets games on the radio all the time is the same Gary Cohen that he grew up in the same apartment building.
I heard you saying this on the podcast.
Yeah, that he found that out. Like, I was there. It was recent.
That's crazy. Well,
yeah, that's where he's from.
Well,
wherever Gary Cohen grew up.
I will say the closest minor league team to me now is the Biloxi Shuckers. And last year, their pitcher, Max Laser, a Jewish guy from Florida, set their single season strikeout record. So I will say no matter where you live, you can find a Jewish baseball connection when you need it.
There you go. Well, I think we should probably end it there, Alana. But thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about just plug the podcast, when people can take a look out for it?
Let's hear your pluggable. We want to know where
Absolutely.
people can find it, how to find it, if there's anything else you've worked on you want people to listen to.
The most exciting thing I'll say is that our host is Roy Wood Jr., who is incredible former Daily Show correspondent. He's a hilarious comedian, an amazing person to work with. I was actually only able to connect with him to do this podcast. I pitched it to NPR and MLB, and they both said, you know, nice idea, but like, let's see what happens. And then I was able to get Roy because my old friend Jasper from Hebrew school, I knew his dad was a writer on The Daily Show. So I reached out to Jasper with the idea. He reached out to his dad. His dad reached out to Roy. And I was at LaGuardia Airport when I got a text from Roy saying I'm in. And I was like, this is the happiest I have ever been in an airport. So Roy's our host, and he's a Birmingham native, and he loves baseball. So this story means a lot to him. So just in terms of the kind of basic information, this will be dropping the last week of May, either the 28th or the 29th. You should be able to listen on Spotify, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts, all those places. Because NPR and both MLB are involved, they're both going to be promoting this, which is really exciting. But definitely people look out on we're going to have roadtorickwood.org and on WWNO and WRKF, which are the NPR stations for New Orleans and Baton Rouge, which is where I live and work. So we're the ones kind of spearheading this whole podcast, but really hope folks like it and listen. And the last fun little Jewish anecdote I'll leave you with is that I did find out that in 1967, the Atlanta Braves did an event at Temple Emmanuel in Birmingham to promote ticket sales, and just for fun, Satchel Paige came. So just imagine meeting Satchel Paige in shul. It doesn't get better than that.
On just a rant, it's fantastic.
Thanks so much, Alana. Love to have you on, and maybe we'll have you back another time for another story about Jewish sports history.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a ton of fun.
Well, thanks again to Alana for joining us. That was really great. We'll make sure to make when the podcast is available, we'll publish it in all our feeds and talk about it some more. But I'm sure it'll be a great listen.
I think so too. We've done a little research in our break and found a couple of Jews and a new Mike Jacobs All-Star who we're likely to see in Birmingham. You know, we're getting half of Paul Goldschmidt,
who's very Christian, we should say.
Very, very Christian.
Jewish heritage
side, grows up very, very Christian. Nowadays, you know, you're looking for names. We try and find people. There's one player who was a Blue Jays prospect for a long time, is now on the St. Louis Cardinals, named Adam Kloffenstein.
Oh yeah, right.
I was very excited to hear about him. Adam Kloffenstein. Did my own research, and I'm going to quote Adam Kloffenstein's grandmother. Adam is 6'6", 200 pounds of power. He is a Christian boy, said his grandmother Joan. He is a member of the Conroe, Texas Church of Christ, and is very involved with his community.
That's too bad. So I guess if he gets called up for the Cardinals and you see him on that game, he is not a tribe member. I should also say someone
excellent Mike Jacobs All-Star, Adam Kloffenstein.
Someone reached out about NHL prospect Cole Yzerman. Yzerman is spelled not the typical hockey way, but
It's wild that there are two famous hockey players named Yzerman, but spelled different ways.
You know what though? I think that's actually sorry. So to cut to the chase, Cole Yzerman is not Jewish. Neither was Steve Yzerman. But I think that's just sort of like a I don't know if he's from Minnesota or whatever, but that seems like a Minnesota type name.
From Newbury, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind. But I was just going to say, like, there's a lot of
not Jewish suburb.
No, but I was going to say there's a lot of like guys from like the upper prairies of like German extraction or like there's a lot of like Schwartzes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Jaden Schwartz. Like you see a lot of names from like guys from Minnesota and North Dakota, things like that, who are into hockey, and it's always like, oh, are they Jewish? And they're not. So Cole Yzerman, as far as we can tell, is not Jewish. If you see him drafted, who won the draft?
He's
Sharks.
He's likely to be a top 10 pick.
A top 10 pick. Okay, so if you see his name, it seems like he's not Jewish. He's a David Pasternak type player.
Exactly. We are a couple of weeks away from the NHL draft. It looks like Zev Buim, who we do know is Jewish, was a star on Denver this year, won the national championship. He's likely to be a top 10 pick as well.
Okay. That's exciting.
So while we're not, Cole Yzerman, top 10 pick, not Jewish, likely Zev Buim is. Okay. And they actually played with each other on the national junior team, Yzerman and Buim, for a couple of years. So they know each other well. And hopefully, one of them hopefully they'll both get picked high.
Yeah. All right. Let's leave it there for now. As always, we are produced by the Canadian Jewish News. Our producer is Michael Freeman, and you can find our podcast on the Canadian Jewish News website, thecjn.ca. You can also like and subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If you subscribe, then the Menschwarmers comes right into your feed. And if you can't figure that out, find a younger nephew or niece who can look at your phone
and explain to you how to do it.
Yeah, I was walking with my dad today, and I had to turn his Bluetooth on his headphones. It was amazing to find out that someone doesn't know how to do that in this day and age. But shout out to him, and hopefully he is listening to minute 45 of this podcast or wherever we're at. Anyways, thanks for listening, and you can follow us on Twitter at Menschwarmers, where we post occasional news and stuff about Jews and sports. Thanks for listening.
We trying to interact with Ben Stiller on Nick's Twitter.
Yeah, follow us and Ben Stiller on Twitter for an interesting experience. Thanks for listening.